Please, may I invite my panelists to join me here. Fleta, Solomon, thank you very much. Mary Sanchez, Cornelius Miller. I see some movement, not enough.
Hi guys.
Everybody, my name is Daniel Heyman. I run the law practice of cannabis law practice at the largest Zurich-based law firm. I'm the co-chair of the International Cannabis Bar Association Europe section. I'm half Israeli, half Swiss, and I have 3 kids. Now I would like my other panelists to introduce themselves. Maybe we start with Fleta.
Hello everyone, thanks for listening. It's a very dry topic, so we're going to try and make it exciting. My name is Fleta. I am the CEO of Little Green Pharma. It was originally an Australian company. We are listed on the Australian Securities Exchange, but we also have a large operation in Denmark, so we are exporting our medicines mainly across Europe, but also Australia and Australasia. So really excited to be here, and I can contribute quite a lot to the complexities that the entire globe poses in terms of quality standards. It's been very difficult to navigate.
Hi, I'm Mary Sanchez. I'm also a lawyer, colleague of Daniel. I'm French and based in Paris. I originally focused on life sciences, regulatory law, and moved to cannabis 3.5 years ago when it reached Europe. I'm helping those guys trying to figure out how to navigate the complex regulatory framework. We'll discuss a very interesting and dry topic today.
Hi everybody, my name is Cornelius. I founded Demican in 2017, which is the only German company that is allowed to operate in all verticals in Germany and Europe. And I think the topic of today, and I'm really excited because the topic of today, quality standards on a global level are so important and nobody realizes it. So if you listen to our politicians before, I think they thought about it, but they didn't address it to you guys in their panel, and I think it's overdue time.
So the subject today is the quest for one global cannabis standard. This may suggest that there's no global cannabis standards at all today. Of course, we all know that there are a lot of standards already in the market, and the medical markets, the recreational markets, they all overlap. We're trying to figure out now which standards we're talking about in the first place. So maybe you guys can tell me which standards are we talking about at all here.
Well, that's an interesting question itself. So I think probably a place to start would be, there are a couple of different, or many different monographs for a start. You've got a couple of general monographs, like the EU monograph, and then you've got the US monograph. So we have these little global conglomerates of pharmacopoeias. But then you've also got national monographs as well. So each country, sometimes even each state or individual can have their own monograph. And which one rules? The ICH guidelines actually probably sit on top of all of those standards. But then, of course, underneath those, you've got the EU GMP, which is looking at the API and medicinal products. You've got starting materials, which is more around the GACP side of things. So when we start talking about standards, there are so many different things that we can sort of unpack, I guess, from there. And it's knowing which one rules in the country that you're working in or trying to consider.
When you speak about the monographs, you're referring to quality standards in first instance that are relevant for the pharmacists.
Absolutely, yes. So I am talking, so there are many different standards I think we sort of discussed earlier, there's the ESG, there's all sorts of standards, but I'm just at the moment referring to the quality standards in terms of the final products and preparations, so that you can export these, and we have global patients. And when you're talking about global patients, there really needs to be a global standard, a baseline standard that everybody can refer to, because we need to have the same efficacy, the same quality controls, the same safety, it needs to be an even playing field. And so I think that that's probably the topic today that we'll look to unpack, is along those quality lines.
Yeah, and I really agree with you when you say like we have like global patients, and that's the key. Coming from a pharmaceutical background, I can relate to this issue, is that the patients and the therapeutic indications that are elected for medical cannabis are similar in many countries. But when it comes to quality and safety of the products, we can see that from one part of the world to another one, the criteria vary and the quality varies. GMP, yes, it's a very standard word, if I can say, but it's GMP in North America is different from GMP in Europe, for instance. So even though there may be agreements on importation, depending on countries, and we were discussing just in Europe, there are so many differences from a country to another that there's still issues, technically speaking, when it comes to bringing products from a country to another. So there are standards, they exist. Some countries are more open than others on them. That being said, just to quote the French example, where medical cannabis is still not legalized, but they're already started publishing laws because we're expecting legalization next year, hopefully. They speak about EU GMPs and any other equivalent standards that would be recognized internationally. This is a very wide wording, and eventually, technically speaking, any company that would like to bring in their products as medical cannabis in France will have to have their entire dossier assessed by the competent health authority. So it seems easy on the paper. In the reality, it's going to be Inflida, who is your company is part of the pilot program currently. I'm sure you can talk about the difficulties you faced when filing and submitting the dossier and everything you had to go through with the ANSM to have your standards recognized and approved.
Just to take a step back, because we're already diving right into the medical markets. Are these standards that you just mentioned a good sort of base way for the recreational markets, to create products in the recreational markets going forward? Do you think that should be the basis?
Most definitely, yes, absolutely. I think we should talk about what we would want to achieve with a global cannabis standard. I think we can all agree that we would like the commodity cannabis to freely flow from A to E all around the globe, and taking advantage of favorable climates, favorable cost structures, etc., etc. So what would be necessary for that? One is quality assurance standard. So EU GMP by no means is anyway how to define your specification. It actually is a certificate you earn by the government for producing in a way that assures constant quality and that you're able to learn from your failures. So if this is the most common definition of EU GMP, and I think we all agree that everybody who's producing cannabis should abide to this standard, this mindset, or this rules of EU GMP, because it's helping patients and it will help consumers. It also levels the interaction possibilities of all companies around the globe, because then you can actually go from one country with your product to the other. So quality assurance. Then we come to specification, and I think here it's really crucial, because for us purchasing product from all around the globe, we always face this challenge that first of all, the yield that you achieve in one country or the other might differ, but there's also mold. So you want to have a specification of cannabis all around the globe. What is the allowed threshold for mold? What is the allowed threshold for yeast? What is the allowed threshold for aerobics? What is the allowed threshold for THC variants? I think those are the four you want to look for, and you want to start discussing around the globe what they should look like. Should they look like in Germany? Very tight, very strict So we're importing a beautiful product from LGP from Australia, and I think we agree it's hard to grow something as high quality as this. So should that be the standard for everybody? In my humble opinion, yes, but it's debatable. But we should have like one standard there in what is cannabis looking like.
So you mentioned global trade. I was a commodities trader before I became a lawyer actually, and we traded coal and fertilizer, and there was always a spec sheet, and based on the specifications you adapted to price. There was always a direct correlation also in the letters of credit and so on. We're not there yet in this market, but eventually it's going to become a commodity. And if commodities move, as you say, we need standardized specification models somehow. Based on which specifications do you think pricing should be determined in the cannabis space? It's a bit...
Today it's THC.
It's just THC, so higher THC, higher price. Is that what it should be? What do you think it should be? Let's be creative here.
Cultivation method should pay off, because what Fleeter is growing in her indoor greenhouse in Australia, what Demican is producing in Germany in an indoor production environment is a totally different product from a hybrid greenhouse. A hybrid greenhouse means there's additional lighting, but still the product looks different. It's more fluffy, it's not as dense. The active ingredients, they vary much more because there might be a cloud over your greenhouse, so it's a challenge. So I think cultivation method should pay off, THC level should pay off, and terpenes should pay off. And I think they will naturally do the last two, but cultivation method is not paying off yet.
So cultivation method, indoor, highest price greenhouse, one level lower, outdoor, even cheaper, basically.
Yeah, I think you could even go a step further, and it probably comes back a little bit to the differences in countries and jurisdictions. But I think, for example, if you look at pesticides, I think in Canada they can have, some pesticides are approved and it has to be at a certain level, whereas in Denmark and Australia you cannot use any pesticides. And that's, is that worth more in the final product? Look, I don't know, but it's a consideration. And I think, if you look at foreign material, I think in the US they have a max of 5%, whereas everywhere else it's up to 2%. Aflatoxins, I think again UK it's higher, Israel it's higher, everywhere else aflatoxins must be lower. So it comes back to this whole, we're all singing from different hymnals right now, and I think once you're all on that playing field, that even playing field, and you have got one standard or something to aspire to, then you can start looking at, okay, what's the pricing mechanism for these commodities.
So perhaps we can have certain bands. One band is for indoor production with a certain specification described to it. Second band for greenhouse. Third band for outdoor production, all with something like that. Right? Okay, let's take a step further. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into the challenges of cross-border trade, what you really experience in everyday life, because it's very different to export to Germany than to France. What does that mean in practice?
Yeah, it is different. It's difficult. You've really got to be across every single country. And even though they might be part of the EU, every country is so different. So I think because the requirements are different, there are issues when it comes to release testing or batch testing. Even packaging and storage, it's difficult. And even knowing where EU GMP starts in each country. I mean, who would have thought that every single country, it could be different. And so that probably needs to be standardised. Is it different?
Can you explain that point, just where it starts? For example,
Well,
where does GACP and where does
Yeah.
GMP start?
Well, this is the grey area, because it depends on the jurisdiction as to where GACP finishes and where does EU GMP start. And so this is different, literally different for every country.
How is it in Germany?
So it used to be that, in Germany you have to understand it's two law spheres that are governing cannabis as of today. Will change in the future, obviously, with the recreational cannabis, but it's narcotic law and it's medical law, and or pharmaceutical law. And pharmaceutical law is handled by different states in Germany. So it's not federal level, but the different states. So they all have a different view on that. However, as a general note on how it's handled in Germany, GACP stops after harvest. So you harvest your product, you might prune, trim, take the leaves away, still under GACP, and then you take it into your GMP area, and you either dry first or trim first, and then dry or trim, and then you package and you store. So this is under EU GMP. It was arguable that drying could also occur in GACP, and you only perform repackaging. There are some of my competitors who are following this model. And the bee farm has been contemplating and publishing new ideas where it is pointing in the direction that drying might have to be under EU GMP. So there's yet another idea that the regulator is coming up with.
Marie, in France?
Well, in France right now, we're only dealing with finished products, so we don't have this question yet. That being said, regarding if we read the regulation I mentioned earlier on cultivation, that set up actually an exception to the general prohibition of cannabis in France. It only mentions GMP for all the stages or equivalent standard. So it will be interesting to see when we go further with the regulation how they deal. All the difficulties you mentioned regarding imports, even pricing, if I come back to the pricing question based on how you grow the products and everything, I think this is going to be the standard, and the quality standard as a basis will not be sufficient depending on countries. Each country has a different way of fixing pricing for products, and if we regard France, which is the pain in the neck in the world regarding pharmaceutical products and everything, because we like to make things complicated. Price fixing for medical cannabis hasn't been set up yet, so I can't tell you how it's going to work, but if we consider it as a medicinal product, we know how difficult it is to negotiate with the pricing authority in France. So I don't think it could be part of the discussion why they're trying to set up the rules to use that as a basis. But I do not believe it will be sufficient, and it will be the only criteria to have your price set up for your products.
Let's go back to more challenges in actually bringing product to one of those countries.
Yeah, look, I mean, even, where did I get to before? Oh, where the EU, where the GMP starts. And then, that sort of dictates from there how you import and how you export. So I think when you look at the release of the batch testing, look, just all of those influence how you actually, when you can import, when you can export, all of the above. But I guess when you look at the other challenges, it's more, how are you compliant? How are you? How does technology play a role in this? And that's probably a jumping the gun a little bit here. But in terms of moving forward, how do we start to standardise these to make it easier? And there's a bit of a technology play here. I think understanding, like if we're dealing with Italy, for example, which is part of the EU, Australia has a mutual recognition agreement with the EU. So most times there is a pathway there, not in Italy, for example. And even though Italy is part of the EU, you have to be growing in Europe, so you have to have EU GMP to get into that country. So it's just another example of the headaches that are involved with each country. But I do think that as we move forward, I personally think that there is an absolute need for a global standard. It's critical to address the key ideas and elements in this medical cannabis industry. And so it does need to be standardised. Which standard do you use? Is it EU GMP? And who's going to agree on that? But once you do, this is where technology can just be so helpful for us all moving forward. Because if you can have compliance, you can tick some boxes, it's going to be much easier. Instead of waiting the 6 to sometimes up to 18 months to actually get audited, processed, and then start the export, the import processing and permitting cycle. It's extraordinary. You know, the lengths that you have to go to, and I think you know, a lot of the hard work has been done, but I think moving forward it can be more simplified.
You asked what are the biggest challenges nowadays, and I think one is you talk to a supplier, potential supplier, and they start talking about their amazing product, really amazing product, and they start saying like no mold at all, at least according to our specification we are all fine. And then you look into their specification and they can have like mold 10 times you can have. So you can't import. So this makes it very difficult right now to, for example, to work with US American companies. Not that they could technically export right now, but they wouldn't export you something you could actually import. But this is one thing. The other one is testing methods. You can't believe the headache you will encounter when you start importing and they tell you, I got really good stuff. It's 30% THC and more. It's really crazy. And you bring it over finally after months and months and negotiations and you test it according to EU GMP testing methods here in Germany. And you find out it's 23%. So there's loads of THC missing because the testing methods are different. So I just wanted to highlight this. Testing methods are as important as specifications to harmonize in the future.
I know this very well from trading because we had certain guys we went to ASTM, for example, or ISO, and we knew always ASTM has a bit higher sulfur. It always comes out a bit higher in coke. So we knew if you want a lower sulfur, we need to go to ISO. It's just how it is. And I think this is a really established market already. There are still these inconsistencies in testing. So I think we're just going to have to find a way to live with those. But we all agree the standard needs to be there. So going back to tech, traceability, quality control, quality consistency, transparency, all super important factors and pillars in this industry. How do you ensure in your businesses that are you doing all paper-based, or do you have some software involved, like Cannabis, for example, which is here? How do you do it?
Yeah, interesting. When we started, so we helped pioneer the Australian industry and were the first producers. There was nothing that we could use. You know, so initially we were sort of using paper-based, but then to get the actual license to cultivate, we had to have a system. So we had to go out and design our own. And, you know, it's not great, but it did the job for what we needed initially. It was, you know, if you're going to compare a standard, it was like having a Hyundai in comparison to a Rolls-Royce of quality management systems, but we started where we needed to start. And now that the company is more established, we have investing in a big ERP system, which is, it's not even seed to sale. This looks after every functionality within the business. But it is super expensive. But it will give us that capability to have oversight throughout the entire business. We're vertically integrated, so to have cultivation and manufacturing, as well as our doctor education and patient customer service side, you know, it's actually really, really difficult to be across all of that. So in Denmark, we recently acquired a facility. A lot of it is paper-based, so we're changing that across now to a QMS system. But there is, you know, technology will play, you know, a key role there. So I think you'll find there's been a bit of both in the industry.
It's probably rare to have one software that covers all of it, right? But as long as you have a few that capture some of the supply chain stations, how do you do it?
So QR codes enabling the customer to track and trace and to have upstream traceability in the sense of you understand what cultivation method is being used, what THC level, CBD level, what terpenes overall, and maybe even better. And this is all batch-based, what major terpenes and what percentages are in that batch. I think that is very important for customers and especially for patients. And you can also use that technology to actually track who, in a medical market, who's receiving the product. Imagine you're using blockchain and people then have it in the chain, that they're the owner of that unit, of that badge, with that THC, so when they encounter the police control, they can actually prove that it is actually the product they bought in the pharmacy and not around the corner from the plant.
So, one last question here, because I see that time flies and maybe want to give the audience an opportunity to ask a question as well. What's the most urgent area where we need further standardization? Just each one if you want. A word.
I think as a lawyer, we'll start with the basics, but quality, safety, and traceability for the products, and then the rest will follow. But I think, like, just to be really short on that the question is the quest for a global standard. Global means worldwide. I do not think it's entirely reachable, but if we can have an alignment on quality and safety at least, that will definitely open doors and facilitate the movement of the products across the globe.
That's a short lawyer's answer. Okay, Frida?
It's kind of a difficult question because the whole quest, right, is for a global standard.
Of course.
Because
I only asked if...
Yeah, of course you do. Because we need to make sure, obviously there's the safety and efficacy, etc., and compliance. We need to make sure our global patients are protected from adulteration and variability in the products. Like, it's absolutely key. And there needs just to be a baseline study, a standard. You can't literally have all these variabilities in the standard. We've all got to be playing on the same, an even playing field and singing from the same hymn book, because otherwise it's just, we're never going to get there as a global industry.
I think the most important parts have already been summarized by you too, but just coming back to the testing methods, I really believe that there needs to be more discussion about that and alignment. Otherwise, we will encounter still challenges in the future.
What are we going to do about it?
Well, they call it lab-to-lab alignment. That is like if you're an enterprise and you want to get along and find a solution. It could be regulators to regulators alignment.
But you're opening up a whole can of worms here, because lab testing is different even within countries, even within different laboratories. There's always a difference, and so they need a standard as well, and so it covers, this covers everything.
I think we need to bring it to the attention of the lawmakers and really pound it in. All right, questions from the audience? Maybe one. We have 1 minute left, so it's going to be a short one.
Okay, hold on. There's another microphone. Here it is.
I got two.
Let's hear it from the panel too, by the way. It's very informative. Thank you, guys. Just two questions. We can take one or both. Two quick. One is, do you have any concerns that what you're doing with stacking on standardization on top of the regulations and laws, that you're going to wipe out any innovative small business trying to enter the market? And then second, kind of related to that, do you really need anything more than a consumer safety standard? Is there really any real need for anything more than a consumer safety standard?
I guess, do you look at all medicines the same way and say, anyone that's starting a company and having a pharmaceutical medicine can just sort of have a consumer protection sort of survey or mechanism?
Well, but if someone's making beer...
We're talking about medicinal cannabis.
Yeah.
I think if it was recreation, that's a different topic altogether, and adult use. Food standards, again, it's a different topic. This is a pharmaceutical grade medicine. It's not, in itself. I just think anybody, we're small companies as well that are starting our journey, and we've had to abide by these rules. And I think you have to have these rules, otherwise you've got this patient risk in terms of product efficacy and safety. So I think that there has to be something, yeah. What does that look like? I don't know. I'm not the expert. But I think that there just has to be the same standard that we all play from, because all of our countries are different, and yet we're looking at global patients. So
I think if I may add to that, if we're talking about medicinal cannabis, which is something completely different from recreational, even though I agree that a lot of recreational users are patients originally, but that's a different topic. What I often say to company that comes to me and say, hey, I want to start a business in medicinal cannabis, I'm like, okay, are you able to think pharmaceutical? If you're not able to think pharmaceutical, you're not going to make it. Simply because, and I think both of you can testify about how much investment you need to make to build facilities, to ensure safety and security of your facilities. So when you ask whether it may wipe out some small players that would like to enter the market, yes, it will, but it's a very tricky topic. And as a lawyer, there's also something that all the players in the pharmaceutical and medicinal cannabis need to understand is as soon as you have patients involved, there is something that we call product liability that happens, and it can cost you like a lot if anything happens. So yes, those standards are critical and really necessary.
So if you look at what EU GMP requirement in Germany and Europe and the European pharmacopoeia and the German pharmacopoeia are doing to the product, to the end result is, in my humble opinion, a clean product, be it for medical or be it for recreational. So I strongly advise us all, being interested in the topic, to produce clean products. And if it must be via EU GMP, because it makes sense, a lot of sense, then that's good. Because we will have happy consumers and happy patients. And this is actually what I want, and I think the industry should want it.
I mean, actually, food safety standards are even higher standards than for pharmaceutical products, because there's a weighing of interest in medicine, and toxicological studies actually have to pass a higher bar in foodstuffs regulation.
Yep. Thank you so very much. We are a little bit over time, so we can't take another question. But let's hear it again for Daniel Heyman, Marie Sanchez, and Phoebe Solomon, and Dr. Cornelius Malcolm. That's all fantastic. We thank you all.